There was something on the ground. It had crashed, there was wreckage, and as we found out much later, there were bodies.
Our government and other governments have been denying or covering up UFO evidence.
They were holding back on all this stuff. This was extraterrestrial in origin. It was outside of our technology of building something like that.
The UFO phenomenon is something highly complex and is composed of many, many different aspects.
Well, you have to ask the question, are they from another planet? We don't know the answer to that. A lot of people believe they're extraterrestrial. A lot of other people believe that they are from other dimensions, parallel universes, time travelers, that they're us at 2 million years in the future.
These extraterrestrials have been manipulating life on this planet for eons.
During that time, I saw a document entitled Operation Blue Fly Report 314. In that report, it states and makes it clear that what crashed was not an object that originated on this planet. It was, in fact, an object of extraterrestrial origin.
On the 9th of December, 1965, hundreds of witnesses in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania saw an unidentified flying object streak through the sky.
But it was the people of Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, who not only saw, but actually found what many claim was a vehicle from outer space. The object was clearly seen, not just falling, but appearing to land in the woods nearby. Within 2 hours, armed military forces of the U.S. government literally invaded this small Pennsylvania town, retrieved the object, and hauled it away. What was it that fell or landed near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania? Does the U.S. government now have an authentic UFO in its possession?
For over 35 years, Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, has been a town divided by a bizarre controversy. Many of its citizens claim that nothing out of the ordinary has ever happened there, while other residents claim that in December of 1965, this Westmoreland County village was briefly the home of a crashed UFO.
The American government's policy on UFOs has taken some bizarre twists and turns in the last 50 years.
To the best of our knowledge, this all began in 1947 with a private plane flying over Washington state.
A businessman, Kenneth Arnold, saw 9 crescent-shaped objects flying in an echelon formation near Mount Rainier.
And he naturally thought that these were planes, but they were not behaving like any airplanes he had seen.
He told reporters at Yakima, Washington, that the motion of the objects he had seen was like that of a saucer skipping across a pond.
This was the first sighting to really stick in the public mind, and it gave it the term flying saucers.
Well, when this thing first began to develop in the late 40s, the military people primarily made the policy decisions. Harry Truman turned it over to the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, and being professional military, having just been through a terribly bloody war, and then being involved in what turned out to be a very stressful Cold War, the policy decisions were based on fear. We didn't know who these people were, where they were from, why they were here, and of course, the whole nature of military thinking is they're here to invade us. They're going to take over the planet.
In September 1947, Lieutenant General Nathan Twining, head of Air Materiel Command, wrote to the office of the Commanding General of the Army Air Forces. And in this letter, he strongly recommended that an official investigation be carried out. And on December 30th that year, a project was approved and given space at Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. The general public knew that the Air Force had started some kind of hunt for flying saucers. So the operation was widely referred to as Project Saucer. but its official code name was Project Sign. From its very first investigation, it was clear that something else was going on behind the scenes. What appeared to be going on was an attempt to conceal the whole truth about the matter.
In 1948, in Project Sign, something called the Estimate of the Situation was written. There's controversy about what was in the Estimate of the Situation and who wrote it, but it stated essentially that this was an extraterrestrial phenomenon. The Estimate of the Situation was then sent to George Vandenberg, who was Air Force Chief of Staff at the time. Vandenberg took a look at this estimate and just thought that the document was just ridiculous, nonsense. He ordered all the copies of it destroyed, and they were, which is why we don't really know what was in it.
If the report contained nothing of a secret nature, why was the order given for it to be destroyed?
They evidently hit on something he already knew. So the only thing he could do was reject the report and order every copy of it destroyed. From that time on, we can trace the deliberate attempt on the part of some, not all, of the Air Force to conceal the truth about UFOs.
What is the truth about this strange metal object that witnesses say crashed in the woods near Kecksburg? And why do some of them say the local people were ordered to keep quiet about what happened?
What you saw out there in that field, it was nothing.
Was it because they had stumbled across some top-secret government project? Or because they had seen an object that proved the existence of intelligent life on other planets? To learn the truth, we'll have to go back to that December afternoon in 1965.
It was about 4:47 p.m. when the object apparently impacted in the woods at Kecksburg. There are a number of local residents around Kecksburg who saw the object get down into the wooded area. While none of these people reported any type of sound of impact, almost momentarily there was a column of blue smoke that rose up out of the woods.
According to the eyewitness accounts, Kecksburg residents rushed to the spot where they now saw smoke rising through the trees.
By the gulch, I saw a big boom over.
There, they say, they discovered a metallic object partially buried at the bottom of a ravine, still smoking from its long descent through the Earth's atmosphere. Kecksburg resident Jim Romansky says he was one of the first to locate the object at the bottom of a densely wooded ravine.
Here was this large metal object in front of me. I've described it as a large acorn. And the reason I say the acorn is because around the bottom of this object there was a bumper that went the whole way around this thing. It was dented and it had a very distinct color. This thing was a bronze, copper, steel. It was a color that it's very hard even to describe.
Then, according to Romansky and many other witnesses, armed U.S. soldiers began to arrive with trucks and other heavy equipment.
You know, the military started coming in. We were under martial law. Jeeps, trucks everywhere. The MPs were at every corner.
Down through the woods come two guys. Trench coats, crew cut hair. He looked around, he looked at the object, he looked at us, in a very authoritative voice, told us that this area is now quarantined, it's restricted, to get out.
Okay, guys, let's split it up then.
According to Romansky and many other witnesses interviewed by Stan Gordon, the object only remained in the ravine for a few hours because the soldiers who had so quickly arrived on the scene recovered the object and took it somewhere else.
Here comes this big flatbed truck. The back of this flatbed, they had this big tarp on it, and it was stretched down around this object. And it had the same outline. In fact, I know I could see the bumper under this tarp because you could see the shape of this thing. The tarp was pulled so tight that you could see the shape. And I knew in my mind that was what they brought down off that mountain, the object.
The military truck with the flatbed trailer with the object on it departed late that evening from Kecksburg. And from information we now have, the truck continued on and it went to Lockbourne Air Force Base in Columbus, Ohio, where it stayed over for a short period of time. From there, it went over to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. It seems very likely that our government had tracked the object and they had notified the quick response recovery teams that are involved in this type of operation.
Since the object was taken away, and to date at least never seen again, you might think that as far as the residents of Kecksburg were concerned, the incident was over. But according to a number of the eyewitnesses, the most terrifying aspect of their encounter with a UFO had just begun.
John Murphy, who was the news director of WHJB, felt that the story concerning the object at Kecksburg was of great importance. So he did a lot of investigation on the case and interviewed a number of witnesses who had been involved or had knowledge about the incident.
Now, what exactly did you see?
I saw a ship falling from the sky and was burning.
Is that what you saw, ma'am?
It was in the shape of an acorn, came down out of the sky, and it just landed really smoothly in the woods. It had interesting writing on it, like nothing we've ever seen in this world.
Writing? Are you sure it wasn't like Japanese writing or something
No,
that you haven't
positive.
seen before?
Very different.
You're saying it's a spaceship now, not anything that our
UFO.
government...
Yeah.
Yes.
It was...
Absolutely.
So what is the situation here on the home front around here with all the soldiers?
We don't know what's happening, so it's very frightening.
According to the witness accounts, something seems to have badly frightened a good many of those who had seen the unidentified flying object and who had witnessed its recovery by the military.
This is John Murphy. We're going to cut for a quick commercial break. Hello, this is John.
Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
Sally?
Hey, Sally, how are you doing?
Listen, about our interview?
Yes, that was a great interview yesterday. You and your son did a good job.
Well, I know I thought I was short, but I'm not. And I made a big mistake, and you need to not air it.
What?
Well, people make mistakes, and I was wrong.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
And we're back.
It seems as though something must have occurred between the time of the interview with John Murphy and the time that the radio special was to be aired, because of the fact that these people were willing to be interviewed, and then suddenly they decided they didn't want their name or any information aired with this report.
Why? What happened to cause the witnesses to refuse to make their testimony public when they'd been so willing only hours before? Did something of unknown origin land or crash near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania? Or didn't it? What could bring the military out so quickly and in such numbers to what is still a rural township in the Pennsylvania hills? Is there an official government position on this as yet unexplained event? And if there is, what exactly is it? With a few minor variations, what we have just seen is the story eyewitnesses have been telling about the Kecksburg event for the past 35 years. It seems simple and straightforward enough. A flaming object of some sort came down in the woods. A number of people saw it in the sky. Some went to the site and actually examined it close up. Then military officials came in, scooped it up, and hauled it away. That should have been the end of it. But there are complications.
Anything given to Project Sign had to be purged and passed down from upstairs after they found a way to successfully explain it away, either that it was Venus, a star.
But the fact the Air Force ultimately dismissed this sighting suggests they weren't interested in solving the mystery.
Project Sign continued to find explanations for many of the sightings that were reported to them.
Project Sign was eventually changed to Project Grudge to get out what were considered to be soft-minded people, making Project Grudge a little bit more hard-nosed. The problem was, even Project Grudge had a significant number of cases which could not be identified. By 1951, Project Grudge became Project Blue Book. So the Air Force embarked on a mission to go forward and reduce the number of reports to a minimum. And their identifications became outlandish, totally unrelated to what people were seeing, and what they were looking at was not a UFO, obviously. It was something else. Once the reports were reduced to a minimum, it would show people that everything in the sky could be identified.
The Air Force wanted to be able to say, we have the situation under control. After 1953, Project Blue Book was not trying to find out whether there were visitors from outer space.
Jim Romansky says that he has maintained for 30 years that the meteor story was the one given to some Kecksburg residents by the military.
To jump in a truck and someone said, "Hey, what was that up there anyhow?" And the guy hollered back, "Oh, it was a meteorite." And I looked at one guy and we both bust out laughing, because we knew it was no meteorite.
But strangely enough, there was a meteor sighting that very night, seen by hundreds of people across the northeastern United States and some parts of Canada. That is a fact that is not in question. But could it have been seen in Kecksburg?
A typical meteorite event is one of the most spectacular things that is fairly commonly observed on the Earth. An object from space plunges into the atmosphere of the Earth, perhaps as fast as 40 miles a second. It pushes the air in front of it. The air pressure builds up and often fragments the object, breaking it into many pieces that looks like a shower of Roman candle as the pieces then disappear. And the fireball can be very bright, so bright it can be seen in broad daylight as a brilliant thing in the sky, or so bright that it can light the whole night sky almost like day.
Could this have been what the area residents in and around Kecksburg actually saw?
I was working on my car, Corvair, out in the driveway, and I heard this sizzling noise, and I couldn't figure out what it was. It didn't sound like an airplane. And I looked up in the sky, and coming from the north, I'd say northwest, and headed east-southeast, and it looked like a big fireball. It was up there about, I'd say 2 or 3 miles, maybe better than that. And I watched it, and it seemed like it was headed for the mountain. So I went out on the road right out here, and I watched it, and it seemed like it couldn't make up its mind what it wanted to do, just like if it was radio controlled. It made like a figure 8, and it come back in, I'd say, almost into Kecksburg, and it just went down. It just disappeared.
There are two things that you can guarantee with almost every fireball event. One is that it's interpreted in the experience of the viewer, so there'll be a lot of different interpretations. And secondly is that there'll be a lot of misimpressions, a lot of confusion, and that the people who believe they know where it landed are really very far away from where the event occurred.
And I figured, well, I'm going to go up and look. So I figured, well, I'll go up there where I used to go hunting and set up on top of the hill, and you can overlook Kecksburg down in the valley, and that would be a good spot to find something. So I went up, and I looked down in the woods, upper part of the woods there at the edge, and you could see this arcing, and it just looked like somebody welding or something. So I went down, got my flashlight, went down and crossed the creek, and I went up, and there it was. I says, I couldn't figure out what it was. And it looked like an acorn, but the front end of it was dug down in the ground about 2 or 3 feet, and there was no windows in it. There was no rivet marks or nothing. It just laid there, and it was like arcing, and you could smell like some kind of a acid or something like that, a burn or something. And I figured, well, it couldn't be an airplane. It couldn't be a meteorite, because meteorite, I understand, whenever they come down with a bang. They come straight down. And this couldn't have been a meteor. And like people says, it must have been a meteor. I said, no, it wasn't a meteor. I said, it was something that I'd never seen before.
Bill Bulebush was just one of the eyewitnesses to get within 15 to 20 feet of the object. He and other witnesses described it as about the size of a Volkswagen, but plainly visible. Could they be describing a meteorite?
If you had a meteorite the size of a Volkswagen surviving to the Earth's surface, it's going to be going at a velocity of 4 or 5 miles per second. It's going to make a crater in the soil, and it'll do shockwave excavation. It'll make a crater maybe 4 to 10 times its own diameter, depending on its velocity. And at the end of that, if it has not disrupted, it will burrow out at the bottom of the crater and make a little tunnel and come to rest at the end of that tunnel.
Obviously, what eyewitnesses say they saw in the woods that night was not the object meteorologists would describe as a meteorite. Yet the very fact that there was a meteor seen in the area that night has added confusion to the controversy.
The evidence that the object was a meteor is overwhelming. It was well documented by sightings and photographs taken widely apart in different parts of the country. The fact that it was seen from such widely separated areas demonstrates that it was something very high in the sky, which fits naturally the description of a bolide or a fireball. Also, it was traveling at the appropriate speed, about 32,000 miles per hour, and astronomers estimated that, plus they even have a photograph of a smoke trail. So it's well documented that it was a meteor.
On December 9th, 1965, 4:43 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, a meteorite entered the atmosphere south of Detroit, headed out over Ontario, south of Windsor, Ontario, and any fragments would have landed in the area south and east of Windsor, Ontario. It would have been seen over a much wider area, however. It could have been seen in the Kecksburg area, but there's no question it could not have landed there. It was headed in the wrong direction.
Yet there also seems to be little question that the military did move into Kecksburg very quickly and with considerable purpose and manpower.
So we went back up, and I say in an hour, maybe hour and 20, 30 minutes, something like that. And you couldn't get near the place. I says cars and people and everything. So we finally worked our way up into where I had the car parked before. And my kid couldn't get over. The Army was down in there, the trucks. And the Army, they had like a fence around there that you weren't allowed in there. And that was it.
It seems unlikely that the U.S. military would take such extreme measures to protect a meteorite. Yet some witnesses today insist they were threatened. Others claim nothing at all happened.
I know it's been suggested that our government and other governments have been denying or covering up UFO evidence. If that's true, it's easy to understand. It could be that they are trying to protect some advanced technology development that they're working on. So by maintaining a cover, they're confusing, and that's part of the game that governments sometimes have to play. But I think there may be another reason, and that is that if the phenomenon is real, and they know it's real, then they don't want to admit to the public that they can't protect us from the phenomenon.
I think these people knew that something had come down, and the military presence was so strong that night that a lot of people who the military knew, seen something or lived real close to it, was either told to be quiet or were bought out or something.
You guys listen up. What you saw out there, it was nothing. Don't say anything to anyone. Not your mom, not your dad, or anyone.
But remember, John Murphy, news director of the local radio station, was already interviewing witnesses for a special news program he called Object in the Woods. Suddenly, he ran into a stone wall. Could there be more to this part of the story than meets the eye? There are those who believe John Murphy may have been an eyewitness himself.
He told me that something had landed in the woods. He didn't know what, but he was going down there. When he came back up, at some point there, military had come in. The state police were there. He couldn't get back down. They took the film out of his camera. I believe he still had some in his pocket that they didn't find. He had his tape recorder with him.
From all accounts, John Murphy was an aggressive professional newsman. Could it be that he actually got photographs of the object?
I know John had pictures of the object. He told me he did. He wouldn't lie about that. It's too good a story to pass up.
But unfortunately, John Murphy never got to tell his story.
We received other calls early tonight from some other people who said they had changed their minds now at the last minute and did not want the statements they had made over this past weekend used on this radio program tonight. One person said that they was afraid of the state police, and another person said they did not want to get in trouble with the Army.
A week or two after that, after they had censored, or the program had to be so censored, that he clammed up all of a sudden himself, wouldn't talk about it. Somebody had to have gotten to him, because it was very unlike John to just drop something.
John apparently let the matter drop for several years, but a few weeks after giving Stan Gordon a copy of the complete, uncut tape that he never got on the air, John Murphy was killed in a bizarre hit-and-run near Santa Barbara, California.
As I read on the police report, he was looking at, or crossing the road to look at, the oil slicks up in Santa Barbara at 10 o'clock at night. Why would he cross a road at 10 o'clock at night to see an oil slick? The whole thing didn't make sense. It's like, somebody want to shut him up?
We may never know. Even the tape given to Stan Gordon has mysteriously disappeared. All of that notwithstanding, the official government position even today is that what actually came down in Kecksburg was a meteor. A flaming object that made a controlled landing. A metallic shape without joints or seams. Strange markings unlike anything on Earth. Rapid military deployment. If all these clues are based on fact, do they indeed add up to some kind of spacecraft from another world? Or is there some other possibility that might excite that level of government interest? It is not disputed that the military gathered up and hauled something away from Kecksburg that night. We can safely assume it wasn't a meteorite. So, what was it? Clifford Stone, a former military NCO involved with UFO investigations, believes he knows.
I believe the United States government has the crashed remains of several UFO crashes as well as debris of several other UFOs, to include the object that was recovered from Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. My basis for this belief is on what I have observed and what I have been involved in for 22.5 years serving this great nation of ours.
The government, of course, has not owned up to any such thing, and the mystery took on a new and surprising twist when reports of a secret Russian satellite suddenly began to surface. Now, there was another possible scapegoat. If the meteor thing didn't hold up, maybe the episode at Kecksburg could be fallout from a failed Russian space launch. A satisfactory explanation for what landed at Kecksburg still eludes serious researchers. Could it be there was something going on at that time the government wasn't willing to share with the public? If so, what's the point in keeping it a secret today? What was Cosmos 96, and how did it get to be entangled with the events of Kecksburg? Setting aside the idea of a meteor for the moment, there seems to be just two possibilities for what came out of the sky near Kecksburg in 1965. Either it was part of a top-secret American or Soviet satellite project, or it was some sort of vehicle that no one is willing or capable of describing.
Remember that by 1965, both the United States and the Soviet Union had the capability of putting nuclear weapons in orbit, and each was desperate to learn about the technology of the other. These rockets had segments that were jettisoned in flight and that fell back toward the Earth, presumably to burn up on re-entry. This practice has continued to the present day, and we now know that sometimes large parts of these space vehicles do not burn up entirely. Occasionally, a rather large fragment will actually reach the ground intact.
There has been a treaty on the books for many years that launching countries had in regard to the fact that if something of foreign origin would fall on our soil, we would recover it and make them aware of this and give it back to the launching country.
Remember that the American military would have been very interested in recovering a Soviet probe such as Cosmos 96. It would have told a great deal about Russian military expertise at that time, particularly if there was any reason to believe that the object was part of a Soviet weapons system equipped with nuclear missiles.
December 9th, 1965, seems to have been a particularly exciting day for things falling out of the sky. The fact is, a Soviet Venus probe launched the previous November did come crashing to Earth on that particular date. The question is, could it have come down near Kecksburg?
Weapon-bearing satellite systems are not designed to make soft landings. If indeed the object that came down in Kecksburg that day was a part of such a weapon system, it first of all would not have made a soft landing, and secondly, most likely there would have been massive destruction in that area.
It was launched on November 23, 1965, but its booster failed before it could be sent on its way to the second planet.
It has indeed been verified from the U.S. Space Command and the Naval Surveillance Center that Cosmos 96 did indeed re-enter the Earth's atmosphere at about 3:18 a.m. on the same morning of the Kecksburg incident, and that occurred in Canada. Cosmos 96 was a Venus probe, and there are in fact similarities in the general shape of the two.
There was a tiny bit of resemblance, but that's where it stopped. I mean, the Venus probe, you had seams, you had pieces sticking out.
If the object at Kecksburg was a failed Soviet probe of some kind, could this explain the strange hieroglyphics seen on the object by several witnesses?
The external markings or identification markings that we have seen on many of the Soviet probes at the time would look very unusual to people who are not familiar with the Russian language or the type of lettering. And in fact, if the object had re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, there could have been some scarring and burning, and they could have looked somewhat distorted from the re-entry.
My dad is originally from Kiev. And I went to him one time and I said, Dad, I says, you could read and write Polish and Russian. He says, yeah. I said, write me something in both dialects. He says, what? I said, just write me anything. And he wrote a few things, and I looked at it, and I turned it upside down. I even held it up and I looked backwards to it. Even the Polish and Russian writing that I seen doesn't come nowhere near it.
The simple fact that Cosmos 96 fell to Earth on the very same day as the Kecksburg incident seems to be sufficient evidence for many people that they were one and the same. But perhaps we shouldn't make up our minds just yet.
I mean, the Venus probe, you had seams, you had pieces sticking out. It was that quick that I could look at the picture and say, it wasn't it. Because I've been a machinist for almost 30 years now. And I've cut a lot of metal, different kinds of metal. And I've never run into it again, never.
So what does that leave us with? Where does the evidence point?
We have to look at the possibility that one, that the object in question may have been man-made, possibly Soviet in origin, or this could have been an extraterrestrial spacecraft.
For 35 years, the object that landed at Kecksburg has been the subject of heated controversy. And there are reasons to believe that the fallen Russian space probe, Cosmos 96, could have been the object seen by so many that December day in 1965. Particularly since we know that Cosmos 96 did crash on that day. But we must still consider several other important facts about that particular space probe.
What witnesses describe, of course, is the fact that the object moved slow enough that some people could actually see what looked like individual flames coming from the object. But according to what eyewitnesses describe, those who did get close to it, they describe an object that looked to have been a one-piece type of unit.
Still, without the object itself, there is no final proof. Is it possible that it still might be held in some military storage facility somewhere? There have been attempts to trace its whereabouts, and until now, the search has come to a dead end. Clifford Stone, a former military NCO who served on several bases where UFOs were the subject of investigation, believes he may have seen the Kecksburg object.
I was fortunate enough to have a friend at Lockburn Air Force Base where the object from Kecksburg, Pennsylvania was brought. He was able to get me into the Air Force Base, and from my vantage point within his automobile, I was able to see the object as it left the hangar. After the flatbed got a little distance from the hangar, I started to hear a high-pitched whimpering sound like that of a high-speed generator. At the same time, I noticed there was blue light emanating from underneath the tarpaulin that covered the object. As the sound got louder, the light seemed to intensify.
I think, first of all, we can rule out the fact that the incident in Kecksburg is a hoax. Something did occur there that night that created a lot of activity, and the fact that the military apparently responded in the way they did indicated the fact that this was something that was important to our government and military. I think we can eliminate the possibility that this was an airplane crash, because initially this is what a lot of the different agencies thought may have occurred. After we eliminate all the possibilities we have as to what the object may have been, we have to look at the fact that this may have indeed been either what may have been a highly advanced Soviet space probe, or in fact we might be dealing with an extraterrestrial spacecraft.
How can we learn the real truth about what landed in Kecksburg in 1965? Is it possible that we are in fact on a wild goose chase, that we're trying to find out about something that never really happened? Many local residents agree that something fell to the earth at Kecksburg, but there are those who claim government soldiers did not hurry to the scene or retrieve anything from the woods. The official explanation of a meteorite doesn't appear to hold up. Can it be that Cosmos 96 is the answer? Many of the Kecksburg witnesses are still alive today. Has their memory of those events changed? Is there any evidence that the government hasn't given us the real facts? With a 30-year-old debate still dividing the citizens of Kecksburg, is there any way for us to really know the truth about what landed there in 1965? It's true, we still don't have the object itself to examine, but is it possible to learn the truth by a process of elimination? What happens if we simply eliminate those arguments that don't fit the facts? Recently, our research team went back to Kecksburg to interview some of the principal witnesses and investigators once again in order to bring you the very latest information on the still puzzling events of December 9th, 1965.
Apparently, whatever this object may have been, apparently it was of great interest to our intelligence community. Whether or not that they were aware that something of a foreign nature had been launched and had re-entered Earth's atmosphere and may have come down in the area, or whether indeed that they had indication this was something much more unusual. Apparently it's something they wanted to get to very quickly and wanted to get out there to recover and study. Those people who saw the object go down said it was going down very slowly as if controlled. And what we now know is the fact that several individuals apparently went down into the woods and came across this large metallic acorn-shaped object down in this ravine. So we actually have eyewitness testimony of the people seeing this object coming in, apparently making some turns, coming down very slowly, and in fact that there is a solid metallic object down in the woods. The official government response is that people had seen only a bright meteor in the sky. The only official government document we found that pertains to the Kecksburg event is from the Air Force Project Blue Book report, and it indicates that a search was conducted in the woods till about 2 a.m., but nothing was found.
That report would seem to be at odds with a number of witnesses who have indicated over the years that a large military contingent came in quickly and took over the town. In an earlier interview, Jim Romansky told us the military not only arrived quickly, but immediately took over the central building in town for their own purposes.
And as we approached the fire hall, I mean, man, you'd have thought there was an invasion going on. I mean, there were jeeps and cars and trucks parked all over the place, all military.
Soldier, assistant agent.
I know what I saw. Get these people out of here right now.
And there were uniforms everywhere. And as we tried to approach the door to go back into the fire hall, there was 2 armed sentries or guards, whatever you want to call them, standing there. It reminded me of some of the war pictures I've seen where these people, military people, come in and declare martial law.
In a more recent interview, we asked Jim Romansky if he could remember anything else about his encounter with the military that night.
We had no knowledge that the military was even there whenever we discovered the object. We did our preliminary search, and we were standing around waiting for someone to tell us what to do. And we had been there probably about 15 minutes. When down through the woods, here comes these two gentlemen, as I often called. One was carrying a little square box, ramrod stiff, long trench coats, no hats, no markings on the trench coats or anything. They come in, they looked around, they said, all right, you're ordered to leave this area, it's now quarantined. And I thought to myself, uh-oh, military. Well, we started leaving. We hadn't gone to more than 10 or 15 feet. And down through the woods, here comes military. I mean, full-blown uniforms, insignia, carrying all kind of equipment. We passed probably 5 to 10 feet away from each other. So as far as I was concerned, I did my job, did what I was supposed to do. What they were going to do now, that was their business, not mine. I got out. It was dark, it was cold, it was wet, and I wanted to get back to where it was warm.
But would a meteorite be something that would attract that kind of attention from the government?
It would seem very unlikely that the military would respond to a report of a meteorite falling in Pennsylvania. Historically, if there's such an account of a meteorite fall, this is something that normally attracts the attention of universities or the scientific community. But from the reports we had from civilians of armed military personnel arriving out at the scene, it would seem very unusual that they would respond to such a fall.
The eyewitness testimony and the scientific analysis appears to confirm that there was a meteor visible over a wide area of the Northeast on the night of December 9, 1965. But that same evidence suggests it could not possibly have been a meteorite that landed at Kecksburg. Could it then have been the much-discussed Soviet Venus probe, Cosmos 96, which is known to have fallen out of orbit on that same date? First, let's consider the eyewitness testimony.
The object that crashed into Kecksburg in 1965 was a very large metallic object that had no seams in it, no windows, no portholes, no wings, no motors that I seen, nothing protruding from it.
I've seen pictures of Russian satellites, and this thing looked similar to it. It looked like the same shape and everything. It didn't have no solar panels on it or antennas. And this in here was like smooth.
These descriptions certainly don't sound like any Soviet or American space probe for that matter. But eyewitnesses can be unreliable. Are there other reasons to doubt the Cosmos 96 theory?
The Soviets reported that their Cosmos 96 space probe re-entered the atmosphere 13 hours earlier than the Kecksburg incident. So that would pretty much rule out that being what landed.
There has been some discussion that what fell at Kecksburg may have been Cosmos 96. Now, we have known for many years that a Soviet Venus probe, which was designated as Cosmos 96, did re-enter the Earth's atmosphere at 3:18 a.m. in Canada on that same day. The incident that happened down here in Pennsylvania occurred about 4:47 p.m. that afternoon. Now, from what we understand, we've never seen any recovery reports on Cosmos 96, but we are told that it did re-enter the Earth's atmosphere in Canada that morning. Now, over the years, of course, there has been re-entry of space debris, and sometimes some materials left, other times they burn up in the atmosphere. But witnesses tell us that the object at Kecksburg appeared to be a large, solid, metallic object that was in very, very good condition. Except for trees knocked down, they were able to see the object that was not buried.
We definitely know it wasn't Cosmos 96. First, both us and the Soviet Union knows exactly where Cosmos 96 crashed. Their technology may not be the state-of-the-art of ours, but it works just as effectively. So we know it crashed in northern Canada. Secondly, international law requires that the country that recovers fallen space debris return it to the launch authority, that being the country that sent it up there. Third, there has not been a protest issued by the Soviet Union protesting are recovering their Cosmos 96, and this would be a tremendous technical powerhouse for us because it represented the state-of-the-art they had at that time. And finally, If it truly was Cosmos 96, by now there would be an abundant paper trail showing that it was Cosmos 96 that we had recovered. What makes this such a great mystery, there is a total lack of that type of paperwork which would have to exist if it were not for one thing. We are lying and covering up the truth of that event as it is being explained to the American people.
So the time, the location of the Cosmos 96 recovery, and all of the usual international follow-up of a known space event are incompatible with what witnesses and investigators report knowing about the Kecksburg event. But if it wasn't a meteorite, and it wasn't the Soviet space probe, what in or out of this world was it?
During my tenure in military service, I was called upon on many occasions to be involved with UFO-related events. It was during one such event that I was at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. During that time, I saw a document entitled Operation Blue Fly Report 314. This document talked about many aspects, technical aspects of the UFO phenomena that we knew at that time. It also made mention of several UFO crashes. Among the crashes that was mentioned was a place called Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. In that report, it states and makes it clear that what crashed on the night of December 9th, 1965 was not an object that originated on this planet. It was, in fact, an object of extraterrestrial origin.
The Freedom of Information Act has limited values to the American people because the National Security Act that was passed at the end of World War II, during the Cold War, states very clearly that any subject or any item of information that could be construed to be threatening to the national security of the United States cannot and will not be released. Now, the Cold War is over. Who is the enemy now? Why are those limitations of the National Security Act still being applied? Why are they still keeping it from us? Under what excuse? Who's our enemy? You come to the conclusion today that people in Washington, at least some of the national security people, look upon the American people as the enemy.
The Air Force has documents on file showing that UFOs have violated our airspace. And if the things that fly right through our radar and violate our airspace aren't a threat to this government, I don't know what is.
It's quite simple. They know. They've known for 50 years that extraterrestrials are visiting Earth.
The Air Force believes the truth is simply too much for us to handle, so they lie to us instead.
Could it be that after all these years of searching, that there is an official government report that provides the answer? What is the government's reaction to all of this?
Over the years, I have approached some of our local representatives about the possibility of doing an investigation on the Kecksburg event. And while some of these people have been very helpful in trying to find some documentation, I think some of these people are very reluctant to get into an actual investigation or a probe into the event because of the political issues involved.
It is difficult to imagine that the military would take the time and effort to rush in and haul away a meteorite. And it's just as difficult to think the Russians would identify Canada as the place Cosmos 96 came down if, in fact, it had landed anywhere in the U.S. And it's even harder to imagine that all the witnesses could fabricate the same story about the same event without someone getting their wires crossed. If my memory serves me correctly, it was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle who had his famous detective Sherlock Holmes say something like this: "When all rational possibilities have been exhausted, whatever remains, no matter how unbelievable, must be the truth."